There is a rope stretched high above the sawdust, and a 15-year-old girl is walking across it. Below her, the gaslight, the smell of horses, the held breath of a Paris crowd. Her name, tonight, is not yet Suzanne. She is Marie Clementine, and she has learned that the only way across is to not look down. Here's the thing about that girl on the rope. She did not come from money, or from a family, or from a father anyone could name. She came up out of the poorest streets of Montmartre, out of a single room and a washing tub, and she climbed higher than anyone expected, higher, in the end, than the rope ever took her. Now, most people who know her name today know it sideways. They know her as somebody's mother, or somebody's model, or somebody's mistress. The girl in the painting, the girl on the canvas. What almost no one remembers is that she picked up the brush herself and became the thing everyone else only painted. But that comes later. On this night, in this circus, she is still just the acrobat, and the rope is still swaying under her bare feet. She can hear the ringmaster below, the shuffle of the front row, the small dry crack of the sawdust settling. She is good at this. She is fearless in a way that will define her whole life. And then, one evening, she falls. A slip, a wrong turn of the ankle, the long drop, and the sawdust that is not soft enough. Her back strikes the ground, and the circus career that took her out of the laundry and into the lights is over in a single second. She is 16. She does not yet know that the fall is the beginning of everything. You see, when a body can no longer perform, a girl in Montmartre in the 1880s has very few doors left. She had already tried most of them. She had made hats in a workshop. She had woven funeral wreaths with wire that cut her fingers. She had sold vegetables from a cart and carried plates in a cafe. Each door had closed behind her. There was one door left, and it was the strangest one. All around her, in the studios that lined the hill, men were painting, and these men needed bodies to paint. Still bodies, patient bodies, bodies that could hold a pose for hours in the cold northern light. A girl with nothing to sell could sell the way she stood. So she climbed the studio stairs, and she took off her clothes, and she stood in the light for money. She was 15 when she first modeled, and she would do it for more than 10 years. She thought she was selling her stillness. She had no idea she was stealing an education, one held pose at a time. Picture the Montmartre she walked home through in those years. The hill was still half village, half city. There were windmills at the top, real ones, and goats, and vineyards behind crooked fences, and below them, the cafes were filling with paint-stained men who argued about color until dawn. It smelled of turpentine and cheap wine and wet plaster. Marie Clementine lived in a small room with her mother, Madeleine, the laundress, whose hands were cracked from other people's linen. The mother did not understand the daughter. The daughter was too loud, too quick, too unwilling to lower her eyes. In the evenings the girl would come home with charcoal on her fingers, though no one had paid her to draw it, because here is the secret she kept in those years. While the painters looked at her, she was looking back. She watched how Puvis de Chavannes built a body out of long calm lines. She watched how the light was caught and where it was let go. She was memorizing, in a room where she was supposed to be only a thing to be seen. And at night, in that small room, she drew, on any scrap she could find, on the backs of things, in the margins. She drew her mother asleep, her own hands, the cat curled on the sill. No teacher had ever shown her how. She simply looked, and then made the line come out of her own fingers. So, the models of Montmartre were mostly interchangeable to the men who hired them. A shoulder, a hip, a fall of hair. But this one had a face people remembered, and a body painters kept asking for, and something behind the eyes that made the great ones uneasy in a way they liked. In 1883, when she was still a teenager, she posed for Pierre-Auguste Renoir. You have seen her, even if you don't know it. She is the young woman dancing in Dance at Bougival, her cheek turned, her red bonnet tilted, one gloved hand caught in the swirl of the dance. Renoir made her look weightless. She was anything but. That same year she stood for Dance in the City, and Renoir smoothed her into something pearly and soft. The way he smoothed all his women. And here's the part most people forget. She hated it. She would say, years later, that his women were not real, that he made them into cakes, into sugar, into things that had never once stood on their own 2 feet. She modeled for Puvis de Chavannes on his vast pale murals, holding poses until her muscles shook. She modeled for Jean-Jacques Henner, for Théophile Steinelen, for a whole hill of men who each saw a different woman when they looked at the same girl. She collected their techniques, the way another girl might collect ribbons. And then came the small deaf man with the enormous laugh, Henry de Toulouse-Lautrec, an aristocrat with broken legs that had never grown, who painted the truth of Montmartre without flattering a single soul in it. He looked at Marie Clementine, and did not see a cake. He saw a woman who could drink and argue and hold her own. Lautrec painted her tired. That was the gift and the cruelty of him. In his portrait she sits at a cafe table, chin in hand, a glass in front of her face heavy with something no dance could hide. He called the painting The Hangover, and it is one of the most honest images anyone ever made of her. They became lovers, the little count and the laundress's daughter. For about 2 years she lived close to his strange, brilliant, self-wounding world, the absinthe, the all-night talk, the laughter that ran ahead of the pain. He, more than anyone, would push her toward the things she was hiding under the modeling. Because one day, in his studio, he saw her drawings, not the poses she held for money, the lines she made herself, in secret, the mother asleep, the hard true faces. Lautrec looked at them for a long time, and what he said next, she carried for the rest of her life. He told her she was an artist. He did something else, too, something small and enormous. He was tired of hearing her called Marie Clementine, or Maria, the plain names of a plain girl. She kept posing for older men, and so, half teasing, he gave her a new one. Susan, he called her, after the Bible story of Susanna and the elders, the old men, and the young woman they watched. The name was a joke, and the name stuck. Suzanne. She took it the way she took everything, and made it her own, and wore it like armor. Marie Clementine had been the laundress's accident. Suzanne would be the one who signed the canvases. She was not there yet, but the name went on ahead of her, waiting. So, let's stop here, in these bright loud years, before the wait comes. She was in her early 20s. She was beautiful and difficult and poor and gifted, and half of Montmartre had painted her, and none of them yet knew that the model was going to outlast the painters. She knew, though, somewhere behind those eyes, she already knew. In the evenings she would sit in the cafes with them, the painters, the poets, the whole ragged court of the hill, and she would draw on whatever was in front of her, a napkin, a menu, the back of a bill, and people started to keep them. That was the first sign, small as a coin, that something was turning. Her mother watched all this with a washerwoman's fear. Madeleine had wanted safety for her girl, a steady man, a locked door, a full cupboard. Instead, her daughter ran with artists and came home with charcoal under her nails and a stranger's name. The two women loved each other the way flint loves steel, sparks and warmth and the risk of fire. Now, here's where the story turns, and it turns the way it so often does for a young woman in that world. In 1883, before she was even 20, Suzanne gave birth to a son. She named him Maurice. The father's name she never gave to anyone. Not to the boy, not to the priest, not to the record. She kept that door shut for life. The baby changed the shape of every day. She still had to model to eat. So it was Madeleine, the grandmother, who took the child. The washerwoman who had feared for her daughter now had a grandson to raise, in the same small room, on the same thin money. 3 of them now, in the space that had barely held 2. And the boy was not easy. Maurice was a nervous, trembling child, quick to cry, quick to fear, clinging and then furious. There was something already wrong in him, something no one had a name for yet. Suzanne would come home from a day of holding still for strangers to find her son shaking, and her mother worn thin, and the room too small for all of it. She loved him. Do not doubt that. But hers was not the soft, endless mothering that the world expected of women. She loved him the way she did everything, fiercely and unevenly, in bursts, with her whole difficult heart. And then she would turn back to her own life because her own life was the only thing that had ever saved her. So, into these crowded years walked a small red-haired man with a pointed beard and a bowler hat, a composer nobody understood yet, named Eric Satie. He lived in a room the size of a wardrobe. He fell for Suzanne the way a wall falls, all at once and completely. He called her his bequeath. He wrote her notes like a man on fire. He wrote about her whole being, her lovely eyes, her gentle hands, her tiny feet. He, who kept the world at arm's length with jokes and strange music, threw the whole of himself at her. For about 6 months she lived in the room beside his, on the Rue Courted, and Sadie believed his life had finally, impossibly, begun. And then she left. That was the pattern already forming. She could be loved, she could be painted, she could be worshipped, but she would not be held down, not by a count and not by a composer. She walked out of Sadie's life, and left him standing in the wreck of it. He never truly loved again. Some doors, once shut, stay shut. You have to understand what these years cost her, underneath the color and the names. She was a mother without a husband in a world that punished that. She was a model, which respectable people counted as barely better than the street. She was a woman who drew, in an age that did not believe women could, every single thing she wanted. She wanted against the grain. And still, at night, in the small crowded room, she drew. The boy asleep at last. Her mother's tired face. Her own reflection, and flinching, in a scrap of mirror. The lines were getting stronger. The hand was getting surer. She did not yet dare to call it a life's work. She only knew she could not stop. There is a crack that runs through the middle of every real life, the place where the bright beginning starts to bear weight. For Susan, the crack was this. She had a gift she had told almost no one about, a child she could not fully hold, a mother growing old, and a whole world arranged to make sure a girl like her never rose. And she was about to find out which was stronger, the world, or the line her own hand could draw. Now, for years the drawings stayed a secret she kept even from herself. She showed them to almost no one. They lived in drawers, and folders, in the backs of things. The private language of a woman who had never been given permission to speak, and a secret held that long begins, slowly, to turn heavy. The 1880s bled into the 1890s, and the modeling work grew thinner. A model ages. The painters look for younger stillness, fresher skin. Suzanne could feel the light shifting away from her, the one trade that had fed her son and her mother beginning, year by year, to close. And here is where the ground truly opens under her. In 1888, in the middle of it all, in the wreckage of the years with Lautrec, Suzanne came to a place so dark she tried to leave the world entirely. What exactly happened in that room, on that day, the record keeps quietly. What we know is that she survived it, and that she did not speak of it after. She came back from the edge into the same small room. The same thin money, the same crying boy, and aging mother. Nothing on the outside had changed, but something in her had been down to the floor of things and had climbed back up. And a person who has done that carries a certain hardness afterward, and a certain freedom, all at once. So, she did the only thing that had ever truly held her. She drew, not for money now, not to be seen, but because the line was the one place the world could not reach her. She drew her mother, Madeleine, the deep folds of that washerwoman's face, every year of labor written into it, without a scrap of prettiness or pity. She drew her son, Maurice, the nervous boy, over and over, trying maybe to hold with her hand what she could not hold with her arms. She drew nudes, women's bodies, but not the sugared bodies Renoir had made of her. She drew real women, heavy and tired and true, standing in real light, in the plain honest weight of their own skin. Here's what you have to understand about those drawings. No woman was supposed to make them. The nude was the highest, most guarded ground in all of art, and it was fenced off for men. For a woman to draw a naked body with that unflinching eye was not just unusual, it was a kind of trespass. And Suzanne trespassed on purpose. The line she drew was hard, black, firm, closed, wrapping each body like wire around the truth of it. There was no flattery in it, no apology. Where the men softened, she pressed down. Where the men idealized, she reported. She had spent 10 years being looked at. Now she knew exactly what it meant to look, and she meant to do it better. For a long time the drawings might have stayed hidden forever, one more woman's gift buried under one woman's life. But she had a neighbor in Montmartre, an old man, gruff and half-blind with fame, who had a habit of seeing what others missed. His name was Edgar Degas, and one day, she let him look. Now, Degas was not a kind man. He was sharp, solitary, and famously hard to please. A giant of his age who suffered fools not at all. Susan showed him her drawings the way you hand over something that could be broken by a single wrong word. She braced herself, and the old man went very still. He looked for a long time, and then Degas, who flattered no one, turned to this self-taught laundress's daughter, and told her that her line was among the finest he had seen. He did more than praise her. He bought her drawings with his own money, and hung them on his own walls. For the rest of his life, he called her his terrible Maria. Do you understand what that meant? For her, in that room, the greatest draftsman in France had looked at the secret she had barely dared to keep, and had told her it was real. Degas taught her soft ground etching in his own studio. He introduced her to the dealers who mattered. He opened, with his own hand, the door the whole world had bolted against her. So, in the early 1890s, Suzanne began to sign her work. Not Marie Clementine, the accident. Suzanne Valadon, the artist. The name Lautrec had given as a joke. She now carved into the corner of her own vision. Every signature was a small act of war. Every signature said, I was never only the thing you painted. And there was money to think of, always, the grinding arithmetic of the poor. In 1895 a steady, prosperous man entered her life, a stockbroker named Paul Maurice. He offered what her mother had prayed for all those years. A ring, a locked door, a full cupboard, a house outside the smoke of the city. Safety, at last, laid at her feet. She married him. For 13 years she lived the life Madeleine had dreamed for her, a comfortable wife with an apartment in Paris, and a house in the country beyond it. And here is the strange part, the part that tells you who she truly was. Safety did not soften her, it funded her. With Maurice paying the bills, Suzanne, for the first time, could paint all day. In 1894, she had already done the thing no woman had done before her. The Société Nationale des Beaux-Arts, one of the great gates of the French art world, admitted her as an exhibitor, the first woman painter ever accepted there, the laundress's daughter, the fallen acrobat, the model, the trespasser, hanging on the walls where the masters hung. Picture her standing in that room at the opening, in a good dress bought with a broker's money, looking at her own name on the wall. Somewhere across the city her mother's hands were still cracked from other people's washing. Somewhere her son was still shaking. She had climbed, and the rope this time did not break. But a woman like Suzanne was never built for a comfortable house in the country. The safety Maurice gave her was a room she painted in, not a room she lived in. Her real life was still up on the hill, in the Turpentine, and the argument, and the risk. The marriage, quietly, over 13 slow years, began to starve. Meanwhile the boy had become a man, and the trouble in him had become a name. Maurice drank. He drank the way his mother had once walked the rope, with a terrible fearless commitment. Falling and falling, he was in and out of asylums by his 20s. The nervous child had grown into a young man. The wine was slowly taking apart. And then his mother did something extraordinary, something that tells you everything about the strange fierce shape of her love. She put a brush in his hands. She thought, perhaps, that if painting had saved her from the dark, it might save her son. She taught Maurice Utrillo to paint the streets of Montmartre. She was trying to build him a rope of his own. He took to it. God help them both. He took to it beautifully. Maurice painted the white walls and empty streets of the hill with a tenderness he could never manage with living people, and the world began to notice. The son, the broken drinking son, was becoming famous, faster, and more easily, than his mother ever had. So, into this crowded, straining house came the last great torn of her life, and it walked in on the arm of her own son. His name was André Utter, a painter, young, striking, 23 years old. He was Maurice's friend. He was 21 years younger than Suzanne, and the moment she looked at him, the comfortable marriage was already over. She was in her mid-40s. She had a husband, a fortune, a house, a name, and a hard-won peace. And she looked at this young man and burned it all down without hesitation, the way she had walked out of Sadie's room decades before. She would not be safe if safe meant small. She had never once, in her whole life, chosen the smaller thing. In 1909 she took André as her lover and her model. She painted him naked as Adam, in a great canvas of Adam and Eve, and she put herself beside him as Eve. An aging woman and a young man, desire painted from a woman's side of the easel, which no one had quite dared to do. She divorced Maurice in 1913. She had chosen, again, the rope over the ground. Now, here's the choice underneath all the other choices, the one that shaped every canvas she ever signed. At every fork in her life, safety on one side, and her own eye on the other, Suzanne chose the eye. She chose to see, and to make others see, over comfort, over reputation, over the quiet life the world would have forgiven her for taking. In 1914 she married André Utter. She was nearly 50. He was in his 20s. And for a while it worked, the way a bonfire works, bright and hot and consuming. Utter managed her career and her son's. The three of them, mother, son, and young husband, became a kind of legend on the hill, the strange holy trinity of Montmartre. And now, freed at last to paint exactly as she saw, Suzanne came into her full power. She stopped mostly drawing and turned to oil, to color, to great bold canvases that hit the eye like a shout. Rich reds, deep blues, thick black outlines holding it all in place. Degas had told her, years before, to trust her own line. Now she trusted it completely. She painted the blue room, a woman in striped trousers lounging with a cigarette. Utterly unbothered, utterly unposed for any man's pleasure. She painted still lifes that seemed to vibrate. She painted bathers, working women, real bodies in real rooms. Everything she made carried the same signature under the signature. This is a woman, and she is looking back at you. Understand what she was doing. At an age when most artists of her time were settling into their habits, she was inventing a way of seeing that the century would spend decades catching up to. She painted the female body as something that owned itself. She had been that body on all those studio platforms. Now she gave it back its eyes. But there is always a price on the hill, and the bonfire of a marriage burns through its fuel. Utter went to war. The money troubles never stopped. Maurice, famous now, was drinking harder than ever, and Suzanne, standing at the very summit she had climbed toward her whole life, was about to learn what it costs to arrive. So, the 20s came, and with them, at last, the recognition. The galleries wanted her. Bernheim Yoin, one of the great Paris dealers, showed her work. The retrospectives came. The critics who had ignored the model now wrote about the master. Suzanne Valadon, self-taught, unschooled, unpermitted, was hanging in the rooms that mattered. And here's the part most people forget about arriving. She had spent her whole life reaching for this, and when it came tangled with everything else. The fame arrived at the same table as the drinking, the money fights, the collapse of her marriage. She was celebrated and exhausted in the same breath. There was money now, real money, and it ran through the household like water through open hands. Maurice's paintings sold for fortunes, and Maurice drank the fortunes, and Suzanne bought a chateau with the proceeds, a great foolish castle in the country, and filled it with the chaos the three of them made everywhere they went. Now, the strange arithmetic of her life had never been crueler. Her son, the trembling boy she had put a brush in the hands of, was now more famous than she was, his white streets selling faster than her fierce true nudes. She had built him a rope, and he had walked it past her, and the world clapped louder for him. She did not let it embitter the work. That is the measure of her. Whatever the noise, whatever the money, whatever the ache of watching her own son eclipse her, she went to the easel and she painted what she saw. Hard and true, exactly as she always had. The world could arrange her however it liked. The canvas was still hers. In 1923 she painted the Blue Room, and it stands now as one of the great quiet revolutions in the history of the female nude, except the woman in it is not even nude. She lies there in her striped trousers and her camisole, a cigarette between her lips, books at her feet, looking at nothing and no one, belonging entirely to herself. Think of the distance in that one image. 40 years earlier she had lain across other men's canvases as Renoir's sugared dancer, arranged for the pleasure of the eye that painted her. Now she painted a woman who owed the viewer nothing. She had walked the whole length of that road, from the thing looked at to the one who looks. Her marriage to utter frayed and tore through the 20s. The bonfire had burned down to smoke and old anger. They fought, they parted, they circled back. In 1934, when she was almost 70, they divorced. But they never fully let each other go. Some bonds are too strange and too deep to obey a piece of paper, and through all of it, the work kept deepening. In 1931, at the age of 66, Suzanne did something almost no artist, man or woman, had ever done. She painted herself nude, old, her breasts fallen, her body thickened, her flesh telling the whole truth of the years. She looked in the mirror and refused to lie. Sit with that painting for a moment. Every other artist of her time who painted aging flesh painted it as someone else's, a servant, a hag, a lesson. Suzanne painted her own. She, who had been sold to the world as young and lovely, now offered it her own old body, unsoftened, unashamed, as if to say, this too is worth your eyes. This too is real. Here's what you have to understand about the woman by then. She had outlived nearly all the men who had painted her. Renoir was gone. Lautrec, dead young of his own appetites, long gone. Degas, her champion, had died in 1917. The old man who had opened the door still holding, at the end, her terrible fine lines on his walls. She had been the model in their paintings, the girl who held still for their vision, the body their names were made partly upon, and she had outlasted every one of them, and gone on painting, into her 60s, into her 70s, still signing Suzanne Valadon in the hard corner of her own unflinching world. The money, of course, ran out the way it always had. The great shadow was sold. The grand years thinned back toward the old scarcity she had started in. She had climbed from a washtub to a castle, and much of the way back down again, and through every rise and fall the one constant, the one thing that never left her, was the work. In her last year she lived more simply, in Paris, still painting flowers, still painting the bodies of working women, still that firm black line closing around the truth of a thing. Her hand did not sweeten with age. If anything, it grew more certain. She had nothing left to prove and no one left to please, and so she painted purely for the seeing itself. Now, the young painters of Paris had not forgotten her. To them she was not somebody's mother, or somebody's model. She was a founder, a first, a woman who had forced a locked door and left it open behind her for all of them. They came to see her. They paid their respects to the fierce old woman on the hill. She could be difficult to the end, sharp-tongued, proud, unwilling to be pitied or petted. She had fed cats caviar in the flesh years, out of pure defiance, and she faced the lean ones with the same lifted chin. She had never once in her life lowered her eyes. And she was not about to start now, with the end in sight. Her son Maurice, against every expectation, outlived his mother, and even, in his broken way, steadied, married late, cared for, still painting his white streets. The rope she had built for him in desperation had, somehow, held him after all. It is one of the few soft mercies in a hard story, and she lived to see the start of it. So, on the 7th of April, 1938, Suzanne Valadon suffered a stroke at her easel, some say, though the record is quiet on the exact scene. She was 72. The girl who had walked the high rope over the sawdust, who had fallen and risen more times than anyone could count, came at last to the end of the long crossing, and here is who came to bury her. Not the forgotten model, not the laundress's accident. At her funeral stood André Derain, Georges Braque, and Pablo Picasso. The giants of the new century came to lay to rest the self-taught woman who had helped clear the ground they built on. The men she had outlived had painted her. The men who followed came to honor her. She was buried near Paris, and later Utter, the young husband turned old, was laid beside her. The strange difficult love that outlasted the marriage reaching all the way into the ground. The trinity of the hill was breaking apart at last, one grave at a time. Now, think of the sweep of that single life. She was born to a washerwoman with no father to name her, in the poorest corner of a hard city. She had no schooling in art, no permission, no place set for her at any table, and she died with her name in the great museums of the world, spoken in the same breath as the men who once only painted her. An asteroid carries her name now, out past the reach of every studio she ever stood in. A crater on the planet Venus is called Valadon. At the foot of the Montmartre hill, where she once climbed the studio stairs to take off her clothes for a few francs, there is a small square that bears her name. She is written into the sky, and into the street. But the truest monument is not in the stars, or the stone. It is in every unsoftened body she ever painted, every real woman who looks back out of her canvases without apology, every fallen line of aging flesh she refused to prettify. That is where she lives, in the act of looking, honestly, at what the world would rather not see. Here's the part I keep coming back to. She spent the first half of her life being seen, held still, arranged, softened, signed with other men's names in the corners of other men's visions. She was the object at the center of the frame, and other people decided what she meant. And then she picked up the brush, and she spent the second half of her life seeing, deciding for herself what a body meant, what a woman was, what was worth the eye's whole honest attention. She crossed, in one lifetime, from one side of the canvas to the other. Almost no one, in the whole history of that art, has made that crossing. I think of her sometimes in that first scene, the 15-year-old on the rope, high over the sawdust, learning that the only way across is to not look down. She fell from that rope, but she spent the rest of her life on a higher, longer wire, stretched from the washtub to the museum wall, and that crossing, she never fell from. There is that last self-portrait, the old woman looking hard into the mirror, her aged body laid bare on the canvas with no flattery and no fear. I think it is the whole of her, in one frame, a lifetime of being looked at, answered at last by a lifetime of looking back. Here I am, the painting says, see me the way I have finally learned to see. She left behind hundreds of paintings, hundreds of drawings, the etchings Degas taught her to make. She left a way of painting women that the whole century would slowly grow into. She left a locked door standing open, and she left the simplest, hardest lesson of her strange, difficult life. That you do not have to stay the thing the world first made you. The washtub did not keep her. The circus did not keep her. The studios did not keep her, nor the men, nor the marriages, nor even the son she loved so fiercely and unevenly. In the end, the only thing that held Suzanne Valadon was the one thing she had made entirely herself. The line, coming out of her own hand, telling the truth. She was never the girl in the painting, not really. She was the one who learned, against every odd the world could stack, to hold the brush, to sign the corner, to look, and to make us look at what is real. So the next time you stand in a museum and see a body painted without apology, an old woman unafraid of the mirror, a real face in real light, think of a girl on a rope in a Montmartre circus, more than 100 years ago, learning not to look down. She fell, and then she rose, and she never stopped rising. That is the story of Suzanne Valadon. Model, painter, mother, rebel. The woman they all painted, who became the one who painted back. She would not want your pity, that fierce old woman with the lifted chin. She never once asked for it in life. What she would want, I think, is your eyes. Open, honest, unafraid. The way she finally learned to use her own. So look. That is the whole of what she asked of the world, and the whole of what she gave it. Look, without flinching, at what is true. She spent 70 hard years learning how, and she left the lesson hanging on the walls, for anyone brave enough to stand in front of it. If this story stayed with you, if this fierce, unforgettable woman found a place in your chest, the way she has in mine, take a moment to follow along here on the channel. A gentle tap on subscribe and like helps more people find these lives worth remembering. Turn on notifications, and you won't miss the next story we tell together, because there are so many more of them, waiting, real lives, real courage, and I would love for you to be here when we bring the next one to light.